The Department of Commerce's mission of promoting job creation and economic competitiveness is critical to our economy and to furthering American innovation. The Department of Commerce has 13 major bureaus with a budget of over $11 billion. The fiscal 24 budget request is $12.3 billion, an increase of over $1 billion, or 11% over the current level. The department's diverse mission areas combine to help foster the innovation and development that propel the U.S. economy. Whether it's research in emerging technologies such as quantum computing, development of improved industrial standards, advances in support of the commercial space industry, improvements in weather forecasting, or efforts to ensure fair trade, the Commerce Department is at the forefront of U.S. economic advancement. The Commerce Department also administers a critical system of export controls to restrict the export of goods that could have a detrimental impact on the national security of the United States. These controls are helping us hold Russia to accountability for its unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and counter the mounting threat posed by China. Closer to home, the Economic Development Administration administers the Assistance to Coal Communities program, which is vital to my district in Kentucky because it helps support job growth and industrial expansion. Although I'm very supportive of the department's mission and many of its bureaus, we've seen unsustainable growth in government spending that cannot be continued in good faith. The Department of Commerce, in particular, has received substantial discretionary and supplemental funding increases in recent years. These increases have far eclipsed typical discretionary budgets of many commerce bureaus. While I wholeheartedly support the department's mission of promoting job creation and economic competitiveness, we must ensure that funding is not only being used in accordance with congressional intent, but also examine which programs are worthy of continued investment. As appropriators, we can and will agree on responsible spending initiatives to continue advancing manufacturing and innovation, rural broadband deployment, and trade enforcement and compliance. Secretary Raimondo, your efforts to promote U.S. economic interests and restore the U.S. as a leader in manufacturing are commendable. I would now like to introduce our witness in a moment in this hearing, and in the coming months, I look forward to discussing how we can work together to ensure that programs important to everyday Americans and American innovation are prioritized. Let me now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and I'd like to join you in welcoming Secretary Gina Raimondo back to our subcommittee. Madam Secretary, as we all know, it's been an extremely busy 2 years at the Department of Commerce. You've been engaging in your ordinary year-to-year responsibilities, everything from census surveys to export control enforcement to forecasting severe weather. The department is now involved in the massive effort to bring semiconductor production back to the United States as provided for in the CHIPS and Science Act, approved by the last Congress and signed by President Biden. The department is also busy implementing funding to help expand high-speed internet access and to support climate resilience efforts as provided in the IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act, also both approved by the last Congress. In the middle of all of this, I was overjoyed to welcome you to my district in northeastern Pennsylvania. We had some very productive discussions, and Pittston's own Mayor Mike Lombardo is one of your top fans at this point. The President's fiscal year 2024 budget is the subject of today's hearing. You have a request of $12.1 billion for the Department of Commerce. It represents an increase of $1.1 billion, or just over 10%, for what are important and diverse missions of the Department of Commerce, all of them critical for the quality of life for the American people and American competitiveness in the world. Your department plays an important role to help strengthen and secure our supply chains, which we became painfully aware of during the pandemic. And you help keep American businesses successful in the global trade market. I'm pleased that your request includes strong funding increases for the Economic Development Administration, as well as the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, which we discussed in Pittston, to help create jobs and economic opportunity and to strengthen our nation's manufacturing base. Among many other initiatives, this request includes strong funding for investments in next-generation weather satellites to help provide more accurate weather forecasting that American citizens and American businesses rely on, as well as a strong funding increase for the Bureau of Industry and Security to help expand its capacity for export enforcement, both domestically and overseas, in order to prevent sensitive dual-use technologies from falling into the wrong hands. However, I am greatly concerned that proposals by many in Congress, and there are voices out there talking about as much as 22% decreases in funding for departments across the board. Those calls for slashes in funding and discretionary spending will greatly damage the efforts that I just mentioned. So I look forward to discussing these issues at this hearing, and I thank you, Madam Secretary, for joining us and providing us your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Let me now recognize Ranking Member Delauro for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Cartwright. Really, I'm happy to be here at this very critical hearing. Thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for being here today. When you took office 2 years ago, our nation was facing an economic crisis. But with your leadership and the help of this committee, we have made great strides to strengthen our supply chains, to make our economy stronger and more competitive, invest in economic development of our communities, and to help the U.S. and its manufacturers and small businesses to be able to grow, to be able to thrive. To build on this success, President Biden proposed a budget that meets the needs of families and communities all across America. I'm particularly pleased to see a proposed 56% increase for the Economic Development Administration, EDA, fostering equity and opportunity for Americans regardless of zip code or background is one of the most important duties of this subcommittee. And the funding proposed for EDA would make innovation more geographically and more racially diverse and create good jobs for underserved and vulnerable communities that need them. I'm also pleased that the budget proposes a 58% increase for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, which helps small and medium-sized U.S. manufacturers create and preserve jobs to help them thrive in a global economy. To make our economy even more competitive, Congress met the moment and passed the CHIPS and Science Act last year. Let me say a thank you to you and to your staff for all of the work that was done on this effort and all the work that you are doing, including through the budget request to ensure that the impact of CHIPS and Science is actualized. This is critical to strengthening our supply chain. But to do so, we must also take action to safeguard our national security and supply chain resiliency. I was pleased to see the International Trade Administration's budget proposes increased funding to assist the Treasury Department in the establishment of an outbound investment review mechanism, similar to proposals I outlined in my bipartisan National Critical Capabilities Defense Act. This would ensure we can quickly address vulnerabilities and prevent offshoring of production capacity and intellectual property to foreign adversaries. Before I conclude, I must mention how worried I am that much of the progress I spoke about it can very well be at risk because of some of my Republican colleagues and what they have called for extreme cuts to government funding. And yesterday on Wall Street, Speaker McCarthy reiterated his intent and others' intent to cut back funding to a 2022 level and to lock in that austerity with caps for the next 10 years. But make no mistake, caps are just another name for more cuts. Caps, in fact, are cuts. As you mentioned in your letter to me on the impacts of these cuts, they would set our success back. This kind of movement was reiterated by a very esteemed think tank, the Heritage Foundation, which I know a number of my colleagues look into and look to for direction. And what Heritage has suggested with regard to commerce is to eliminate the Commerce Department's Economic Development Administration, eliminate the Commerce Department's Minority Business Development Agency, eliminate Commerce's Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and cut and cap funding for the National Science Foundation. Well, these cuts would endanger our national security by reducing our efforts to enforce export controls, including those that keep goods and sensitive defense technologies away from our adversaries. They would weaken our economic competitiveness by reducing our capacity to promote trade and investment, and if implemented, the programs that create stronger communities and better paying jobs across the nation would be dramatically reduced. And initiatives to prepare for disasters and to adapt to a changing climate would be drastically cut. The economic well-being of our communities cannot become victim to these efforts. I, like you and this committee, will fight to continue strengthening our economy, and we look forward to hearing from you, Secretary Raimondo, on the funding that you need to do so to keep our economy strong. With that, let me just say a thank you to you, Chairman Rogers, and to Ranking Member Cartwright. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. We're pleased now to welcome to our subcommittee hearing Secretary Raimondo. You're recognized for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered into the record. I hope that you can keep your statement to 5 minutes or so we can have additional time for questions. You're now recognized. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Rogers, for presiding over this hearing. Ranking Member Cartwright, it was wonderful to be with you in Pittston, and thank you, Ranking Member Delauro, for making the time to be here. To members of the subcommittee, thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to have a fulsome discussion, and I hope to answer all of your questions with respect to President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Department of Commerce. Echoing much of what has been said, I would like to begin by saying that thanks to your hard work and thanks to the major investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act, and your support throughout the appropriations process, the Commerce Department is hard at work and operating on all cylinders to create jobs, improve economic conditions, and secure America's national security for all Americans. Our goal is to make sure that America is well positioned to continue its leadership. Everything we do with the Department of Commerce is designed to enhance America's ability to compete. From the smallest companies to the biggest, we want to compete to allow America to lead in the world. And I'm here today to ask you to build on those investments in fiscal year 2024 so that we can keep the momentum going, continue to invest in American businesses, American communities, and American workers so that we can lead the world. President Biden requests $12.3 billion in discretionary funding and $4 billion in mandatory funding for the department. In the interest of time and respectfully, Chairman, I'll just highlight a few of the requests. My full written testimony obviously will go into the details, but there is a focus in investing in manufacturing, innovation, and resilient supply chains. It calls for $1.6 billion to support the work of NIST, including $277 million for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which has been referenced. The funding will enable these MEP centers to expand coordination with the private sector, to narrow the gaps in supply chains, and to enable especially small and medium-sized manufacturers to adopt critical technologies which will help them be more resilient. The budget provides for $98 million to expand NIST's role in Manufacturing USA, including $60 million in new competitive awards to enable existing Manufacturing USA institutes to promote domestic production of institute-developed technologies. And it proposes $700 million for ITA, including $26 million to establish a supply chain resiliency office to proactively identify and mitigate supply chain risks. It also increases funding to Select USA to attract foreign domestic investment. As has been referenced, for too many Americans, the pandemic was just the latest in a series of economic shocks that have battered their communities, their families, and reduced their wages. Yet, throughout our country, we have existing assets that, with the right partnerships and investments, can be leveraged to help communities thrive. To that end, the budget invests $4 billion in mandatory funding and $50 million in discretionary funds to EDA to fund regional technology and innovation hubs to foster geographic diversity and innovation. It includes $200 million for the Recompete pilot program to provide grants to the most distressed communities with the highest persistent unemployment rates. It includes $100 million for the Good Jobs Challenge, which are highly effective employer-led workforce training partnerships, and $100 million for the MBDA. So I'll close with this. In my few minutes, I've scratched the surface of the many Commerce Department priorities that President Biden's budget request would fund. The fact of the matter is, these are smart, targeted investments in this request, all designed to bolster our economic and national security, make our supply chains more resilient, reshore our supply chains, promote American manufacturing and innovation, and help workers and businesses compete and win in the 21st century global economy. So I look forward to discussing this with you today, and of course, I'm always available to any of you, as is my staff, for any further questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule for questions. I'll begin by recognizing myself. Madam Secretary, the Department of Commerce plays a critical role in promoting economic growth and job creation, from promoting trade and investment to protecting intellectual property and supporting scientific research. The department's work is essential to our nation's prosperity. What key initiatives in the 24 budget request will have the greatest impact on the department's overall mission of promoting economic growth and job creation? Additionally, how will the department ensure that these funds are being used effectively and efficiently? And what metrics or indicators will be used to measure the success of these investments? Many of the increases proposed in your budget request are for programs that received supplemental funding. How will the 24 request build on the support that Congress has already provided?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chairman Rogers. Let me say I want to thank you, we've talked about this in the past, for your consistent support of EDA. And I will focus, my short answer to your question is all of the programs, but I want to focus specifically on a few in the EDA because I think they're particularly vital at this moment in time, given what our economy needs. First of all, the tech hubs. The omnibus included enough for a pilot in the tech hubs. The budget asks for additional money in tech hubs. There is innovation all across this country, not just in Boston, Silicon Valley, and New York City. And we need to invest in communities all around America to tap into that innovation. We need to do that to create jobs in those communities, but frankly, we need to do that in order to compete in the world. And so success will mean communities all around the country that have universities or companies have leading edge technology or research and development in any area, where we invest in them so that they can flourish and create jobs in those communities. Relatedly, there's an initiative called Recompete, which I referenced in my opening statement, which is also a place-based economic development focused on communities that are the most distressed. And I suggest that every one of you has some community in your state that is just chronically distressed and very high unemployment. We can't leave them behind, right? I know in Kentucky you have these communities. And so this is place-based economic development where we have to help invest in what they are good at, retrain people for industries of today and tomorrow. And in so doing, you know, we'll just help America to rebuild itself, rebuild its communities, and I think have a more resilient and equal economy.
In rural parts of my state, access to broadband remains a significant challenge. And this has been further highlighted during the pandemic as more people rely on internet connectivity for work, education, and healthcare. The law mandates that a state must first serve all unserved areas before serving underserved areas. Given the amount of funding some states may receive, it seems possible that a state could award funding to both unserved and underserved communities concurrently. This can result in overbuilding and result in unserved areas being further left behind. What steps are being taken to avoid overbuilding and to ensure that rural communities have access to reliable broadband? Despite the $47 million for broadband in the ILJA, the Congressional Research Service speculates that the United States still may not achieve universal broadband coverage due to cost, affordability, and regulatory matters. When are the BEAD grants expected to achieve their goals? How are Commerce's broadband efforts different from USDA's? And how does Commerce work to complement USDA rural broadband without overlapping?
Yeah. So I'll try to be efficient in my time here. About a third of people who live in rural America don't have access to the internet. And I've been all over rural America and all communities, and it is truly heartbreaking to talk to people without high-speed, affordable internet. And so we are on a mission to make sure that every single American, no matter where they live, has the internet at a price they can afford. Congress was crystal clear. Unserved first. And I intend to administer this program faithful to Congress's intent. Unserved first. Unserved and only then underserved. And so I share your commitment to prioritizing unserved, and everything about what we are doing is to focus on that, to avoid overbuilding, and quite frankly, to make sure that we do have enough money so that everybody has coverage. And it's more expensive in rural areas and tribal areas. It just is more expensive. The way we are putting the program together is that each state has to supply to the Commerce Department and TIA a state plan. And we will assess the plan to make sure that we feel, and working hand in glove with governors in every state to make sure that the plan does what it's supposed to do. Everyone has internet at the end of, at the end of the plan. As part of the plan, the state has to show us how are they using USDA money? How are they using FCC money? How are they using our money? So it's our attempt to weave it all together in the state so that at the end of the day, we work seamlessly with the other departments and make sure we meet the mission of everybody having broadband. I am not pretending this is easy. Anyone who's ever worked in the interagency knows it's not easy. I'm telling you, we share your commitment, and we're doing our best to hold ourselves accountable.
Thank you. Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, as you know, and as I have said, there are voices in the majority here in the House clamoring for 22% non-defense discretionary budget cuts. I'm interested in hearing from you about how that would impact certain divisions within the Department of Commerce, starting with the National Weather Service. What would that do to the National Weather Service, upon whose forecasts American business depends, American people depend, everybody depends. Nobody else does that. It's the Department of Commerce. What would 22% less mean for the accuracy of our weather forecasts?
I think it's fair to say we would lose lives. There's not a community in America who doesn't depend on the National Weather Service for accurate forecasting. The budget presented to you calls for additional funding for the Weather Service and for new weather satellites to make sure we have best-in-class technology so we can make accurate forecasts. Every farmer depends on that. Every agriculture business depends on it. You know, you see these sad stories of people losing lives due to tornadoes, wildfires, everywhere, hurricanes in my part of the world. So the reality is we'll be less accurate. Businesses will suffer, people will lose jobs, and
We'll
people
go
will lose
backwards,
lives.
in other words.
Absolutely.
Right. What about export control enforcement by the Bureau of Industry and Security? How would that be impacted by a 22% cut in funding?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You say non-defense funding. I would argue that what we do at BIS is just as important as defense. We are on the front line of denying China technology that they need to advance their military. We need every bit of this money to be as aggressive as possible to deny China what they want, to advance their military, and critically to enforce that. And the money we're asking for allows for enforcement, so I think it's a huge step backward to our national security.
Well, you mentioned China, so that's where I'm going next. Competing with China. In last year's hearing, we discussed how China has copied the design of our National Institute of Standards and Technology, part of the Department of Commerce, copied the design of NIST, copied Manufacturing USA Institutes, and ultimately pulled ahead of us in the breadth of their investments in advancing manufacturing tech and technology. Study released in March examined the scientific and technological capabilities of countries, found that China leads the U.S. Let me say that again out loud. China leads the U.S. in 37 of 44 critical technology fields that are foundational for our economy, our national security, our energy production. Includes leading in all critical fields of advanced manufacturing, in other key technology areas such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and sensing. Given all of this, I must ask, is it really an option for this country to cut funding for agencies like NIST by 22%, as proposals by some voices within the House majority have advanced?
It's an option, but it's the wrong option, and I think a dangerous option. You know, you just mentioned NIST. The work we do at NIST is cutting-edge artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, semiconductors. The work we do at BIS, denying Russia technology that they need to conduct their war, denying China technology to advance where they're going, this helps all Americans. So listen, I was a governor for almost 7 years. I believe in, not spending more than you need, being transparent, being lean and mean. But denying investments in America's national security and ability to compete and ability to kind of reshore manufacturing and have resilient supply chains is wrong-headed.
I want you to know, it's painful me to utter those words. China leads the U.S. in 37 of 44 critical technology fields. Is our record going to improve in those regards if we cut back by 22% on our budget?
I don't think that it will, but I will say that if we continue to invest, we will prevail. I mean, the work we're doing now with the CHIPS Act, the work we're doing with the tech hubs, we can win, we should win. We have the best workers in the world, the best minds in the world, but we have to invest in, in our technology and our people.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. This week, the NTIA collected comments designed to inform its preparation of a national spectrum strategy. In soliciting comments, the NTIA observed how important the wireless industry is to our economic security and growth. In fact, U.S. leadership in spectrum for 4G allowed it to become the world leader in allied industries like app development. To replicate that success with 5G and to prevent China and others from taking the lead from the United States, we must continue to make spectrum available for wireless networks. But I understand that the FCC is currently acting as a bottleneck today. It conducted an auction for valuable mid-band spectrum that concluded in August, but it has not issued licenses to the winner of the most licenses, claiming that lapse in auction authority prevents it from doing that. Would you agree that expediting rather than delaying the deployment of mid-band spectrum is important to the American economy and to our national security?
Yeah. Let me say this. I'm not going to speak to what the FCC is doing or not doing, but yes, it is very important to have spectrum available to advance innovation. And of course, there is a balance, and the Department of Commerce and NTIA work hand in glove with the Department of Defense to make sure the Department of Defense has what it needs to advance its capacity. But there's no question about it. National defense also depends on America out-innovating our competitors, and we need spectrum in order to move forward those commercial applications.
And I want to continue on the theme of national security. You talked a lot about preventing China from overtaking us, but I want to go back to the CHIPS Act because there are a number of issues with the CHIPS Act as it was written last year that have become apparent. In particular, the ability to funnel money that was meant to support chip manufacturers into other areas of a manufacturer's business. The text of the CHIPS Act leaves a lot to the Secretary. And you recently stated, quote, "If Congress wasn't going to do what they should have done, we're going to do it in implementation." Now that sounds awfully a lot like you usurping the power of Congress to make decisions for yourself. Please correct me on that.
That is not the intent at all. Look, Congress, in a bipartisan way, passed the CHIPS Act as a national security initiative. And we are investing the money to advance our national security goals. So I will correct you on that. There's no intention to do that. And I am, be as transparent as possible to make sure meet the team, know what we're doing. But at the end of the day, we have clear national security goals that we need to achieve. We've put those out in a strategy paper, and all we're doing all day, every day is to try to meet those objectives.
Well, I'm glad the ranking member cited the Heritage Foundation because the president of the Heritage Foundation recently observed that the answer to the CCP's malevolent ambitions is not spending billions of dollars to help Fortune 500 companies with no guarantee that those dollars won't end up supporting these companies' business operations in China. So let me ask you, the legislative text of the CHIPS Act states that semiconductor manufacturing has the meaning given the term by the Secretary in consultation with the Defense Secretary and National Intelligence Director, and includes front-end semiconductor fabrication. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And a further concern, any recipient of this funding is still allowed to expand its operations in China if it wouldn't constitute a significant transaction, correct?
Read that again. No one who well, I'll let you finish and then I'll answer.
Well, what I'm concerned about is that
no company that gets CHIPS money, if they accept CHIPS money, they cannot expand in China or do leading edge. They cannot expand in China for 10 years or do leading edge in China.
to the degree that it constitutes a significant transaction.
Well, if I can finish, the only expansion they're allowed to do, and this is all in the statute, I'm not doing anything that's not in the statute, is they can expand in China for China, but if they take our money, they cannot otherwise expand in China.
But a recipient of CHIPS funding is still allowed to expand its operations in China so long as it wouldn't constitute a material expansion, which is not defined in the legislation, correct?
If you're reading the law, I don't have the law in front of me.
All right. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, I'm happy to follow up with you.
Thank you.
Ranking Member Delauro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just let me follow up on something that you spoke about as EDA, and also to follow up of my colleague, Mr. Cartwright. This has to do with the proposed policy of applying the 2022 budget numbers to the 2024 budget. And I spoke about EDA and how pleased I was that the president requested an increase in funding. But Madam Secretary, when you responded to a question as to what effect these the 22 budget cuts would mean on 2024, you talked about the $155 million cut for the EDA grant funding. What is the impact on communities if that happens? And what kind of an impact does it also have on minority business development agencies and the grants programs that it supports?
Yeah. So I have to say, as a former governor, EDA is something I really understand. Same with MBDA, because I've seen it firsthand, how important it is in communities. The truth of it is, these are all place-based investments. They're investments to revitalize Main Street of Pittston that otherwise would not be revitalized. They're investments that get invested in all of your communities, in places that maybe they were formerly coal communities. And we need to be there to make investments, to get them into new industries so people can have new jobs. So all I can say to you is that without these investments, those communities will suffer. They will not be revitalized. They will continue to have persistent high unemployment rates. And in my judgment, that weakens America.
Right, there's no strength in the economy of either the area or the country. If we're
And I would just say, in the past several years, this economy has it's a strong economy. We have record low unemployment rate, record high numbers of people working in manufacturing, making things in America. If we want to continue on that trajectory of job growth, wage growth, manufacturing growth, you have to keep investing.
Thank you. Speaking of investment, and this is a topic that you and I have talked about many times, and that's the outbound investment effort. And I know that you and the administration are working on a mechanism, an outbound review mechanism, and it will address, as I understand it, disable the capabilities of Chinese military in sectors like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the semiconductors. I believe it's all critically important. My colleague pointed out our deficiencies in this area. But I think that we need to look at executive action and has to be expanded and made stronger. I think folks in America are concerned about China and critical minerals. I think our dependence on China for active ingredients in our pharmaceuticals and life-saving drugs is a big problem during the pandemic. I think it was a startling revelation to some of you know how much of a shortfall that we were experiencing there. The scope of this mechanism, I believe, should be more expansive than the areas that I outlined, which is why the legislation that we put forward, which is bipartisan, I might add, and I know you know that, the National Critical Capabilities Defense Act. But how will the potential executive order on outbound investment include or add sectors, if you will, outside of those that have originally been outlined by the administration? And will Commerce take a look at active pharmaceutical ingredients, critical minerals, the large capacity batteries when working to deal with the scope of an outbound review mechanism?
Yeah. So, listen, you and I have talked about this. I absolutely share your sense of urgency on this. There is no reason that American dollars should be funding China's advances in these critical technologies that they want for their military capability. Having said that, it's complicated. I know you'd like us to move faster. I hear that, but it is complicated. And so I think We're working through it. The lens is that we want it to be narrowly tailored to investments in things that directly attack our national security. And the thing we have to be careful about is doing it with our allies, because it really doesn't serve any purpose, you know, if we don't fund something and all European money rushes into it, for example. So a long-winded way of saying, yes, we are looking at everything you say with a lens towards national security focus. And, you know, we're working with the intelligence community as fast as we can to, you know, have a pinpointed, transparent, clear for business. It's important business has to know with clarity what they're not allowed to invest in. I should say, it would be great if we could have bipartisan legislation to do that. So we're working on our side, but I also would like to work with all of you in a legislative effort.
But, and I understand if I could, 1 second, Mr. Chairman. I understand the issue of our allies. I also understand the issues of the business community, but I think what you are seeing is serious bipartisan support, House and Senate, on this need for a review mechanism.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, we have a moment now. It has taken us all of these years, quite frankly, Madam Secretary, to get to this point. And what the view is, it's my view particularly, oftentimes we say, well, we will do this and then we will do this later and so on. Later never comes. Later never comes. So that if we're going to move to protect, if you will, I use that word, I don't have a problem using that word, but that, you know, our supply chains and jobs and all of that, then I think what we need to do is to seize this moment and work to try to expand as far as we can to make sure that we continue to have the national security issues covered through these other areas. And the areas that are laid out are fine. There are just some others that have, you know, equal amount of interest by the American public and so forth. So you know where I stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to talk about chips, China and Russia, maybe save Russia for the second round if there's a second round of questions. But I supported the CHIPS Act, but only after probably 5 to 7 hours in the skiff talking through the long-term vision of this program, not just being something led by commerce and the commercial requirements, but also making sure that we're keeping an eye on transporting, cross-decking the DOD's requirements into these design efforts, right? And I want to thank you. You actually took time in a couple of those meetings to yourself support them along with the CEO of Intel. I want to ask, and the answer may be classified, but if we can get this in the tank at the appropriate levels with detail, how are we progressing relative to the relationship between commerce and DOD to make sure that we're not, you know, designing a seven nanometer wafer set that frankly has no application in a high-end, you know, hypersonic weapon or a DOD application that we need this to be applicable to? What's that relationship with? Are we meeting the goals? Is the DOD receiving? How's that negotiation going?
Yeah, great. So first, I'm happy to follow up in a secure phone call. But what I will say here is a few things. One, we are working seamlessly and daily with the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. Right now, we're in the process of setting up the CHIPS office, putting the team in place. And we have a team who's focused on just this. You know,
How big is that team?
Well, right now, I think it's about 3 people.
Okay.
But like, you know, we're going as fast as we can.
Okay.
I'm smiling because we're hiring, you know, daily.
Okay.
And we have point people who work with the DOD and the intelligence community. I myself spent over an hour and a half in the skiff yesterday with the intelligence community on this topic. We're going to have the IC involved in threat assessments of companies, sharing with us requirements for secure enclave.
Yep.
They're sharing the requirements for the secure enclave to make sure that we get it right.
Good.
But also, let me say this, as you know, but it's an important reminder, all investments more than $3 billion, the big deals, require the Secretary of Defense, me, OD&I Director, and the President to approve. So I think there's layers of accountability.
Okay.
But at the working level, I can assure you it's happening.
Okay, love to see those details. I also know TSMC currently 7 nanometers, about 10K, 5 nanometers, $16,000 wafer sets, 3 nanometers, they're targeting 20K. So as a trade of costs, et cetera, I'd love to have that conversation in the appropriate places as well. Hopefully you guys are keeping an eye on cost as a metric. China, you would agree China is a pure threat. They're outpacing us, as one of the members said, in 37 of 44 critical technology fields. I think you would agree we are losing about $400 to $600 billion in intellectual property theft to China with these predatory joint ventures that they establish with American companies, get them sort of hooked on the market space, steal their IP, and they basically rob, replicate, and replace, meaning they rob our IP, they replicate the widget, and then they replace our American-made widget in the Chinese market with their own at a lower cost with slight derivations. We are obviously, as you know, completely beholden right now to Taiwan and ultimately China for the semiconductor market. That was the point of CHIPS. Why are we not being more aggressive? We have a country that is a nuclear power country that just killed about 6 million people with a biological virus that was developed in China and released due to negligence. The origins are still, being discussed, but we know it came from China. Why are we not being as aggressive as possible? Why are we not demanding reciprocal trade, for instance, for access to our markets? If you want to sell in the United States, you're going to get 49%. We're going to get your IP and all the regulatory and onerous T's and C's that they put on us when we want access. Why aren't we updating the entity list and denied person lists and putting more pressure on China like we would do with, say, Iran with a maximum pressure mindset? Can you give me your perspective, either your personal perspective, where can we get better? China's eating our lunch, literally and figuratively, and we feel like we're passive. You said the BIS needs to be as aggressive as possible, but we're not actually being as aggressive as possible right now. So I'd just like to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, can I answer? Yeah. Look, let me say this. If you have ideas about how we can be more aggressive, I'm happy to take a meeting anytime. But in the time I've been Commerce Secretary, I've put over 200 Chinese entities on the entity list. More than a quarter of the Chinese entities on the list were put there by us. Last October, we did something this country's never done before in the breadth and depth of the semiconductor controls that we made as applied to the entire country of China. We've amped up enforcement. So, and every day we are on it to try to be as aggressive as possible to make sure that China doesn't get our technologies to advance their military. So, I would just say that. Having said that, look, it's a constant battle, like it is a daily battle. Right now, the trade rep, Ambassador Tai, is conducting the review of the 301, which was focused on IP. And so the point you make is an excellent one. Like, we should have zero tolerance for China ripping off American IP and hurting American businesses. So we are constantly looking at ways that we can protect American businesses and make sure they play by the rules. Let me be clear. We can outcompete China if they play by the rules. And so ensuring a level playing field is a top priority of ours, and you'll be happy to have a further discussion.
I think reciprocal trade is the key. I'm out of time, but I'll take you up on that offer. We'd love to sit down. We have a lot of good ideas. We just need to be more aggressive. Thank you.
Mrs. Meng?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here and for your great work and for literally traveling around the country, continuing to find ways to invest in the American people. I also wanted to ask about the potential proposed cuts of either a return to fiscal year 2022 levels or a 22% reduction, both of whom we've heard from the majority. If there were these proposed cuts, I wanted to ask you about the potential impact in two specific areas. One is on our national security, There's been a lot of talk today and, of course, concern about national security, including making sure that we are keeping sensitive goods and technology out of the hands of our adversaries. And if we are serious about being aggressive and serious about being proactive in keeping and making sure that America is first, like I tell my teenage son, it's not always about just criticizing the adversary or an opponent's weaknesses, but seeing how we can put ourselves on a higher ground, making us more competitive, to put us first. So number one, wanted to know how potential cuts would impact advances in national security. And two, wanted to ask about potential cuts and their impact on American jobs and economic competitiveness. Would cuts weaken our nation's economic competitiveness? Would it affect America's ability to maintain and increase the number of American jobs throughout this country?
Yeah. So first, let me say I have a 16-year-old son, so if you have any guidance on that, I'd be happy to get it. Look, I think yes is what I feel. We have been consistently making investments in our supply chain, in research and development, in manufacturing, and we're starting to see the benefit of that. Manufacturing jobs are coming back. Supply chain is coming back to America. You know, coal communities and forgotten communities, manufacturing communities like the one I'm from, are being revitalized. The investments in BIS, you know, the congressman's, you make an excellent point, which is to say we have to be vigilant on this. If we don't have the enforcement agents, we won't be able to do our job effectively. If we don't have enough analysts, we won't be able to do our job effectively. So with respect to, you know, BIS. So I think that, you know, look at what we did with Russia. Very quickly, we got a coalition of over 39 countries together. Since then, we've put more than 500 Russian entities on the entity list. We've stopped hundreds of millions of dollars of technology going into Russia. We wouldn't have been able to do any of that if we didn't have the funding. So I don't know. Yes, I think it would have an impact on our ability to compete, our ability to invest, and our job creation.
Thank you. And I wanted to also quickly ask about potential cuts with the census. I know that we are far away from the next census, but as you know, fiscal year 2024 is the last year in the Bureau's, Census Bureau's exploration of design innovations leading up to the selection of an operational design for the next census. The budget request for the Bureau is $1.6 billion, with $409 million for the census preparation. Last year, I had expressed my concern to you about undercounting America's children, and I am still concerned that potential budget cuts would impact the research that you are doing that would allow the most effective, innovative, and secure methods of data collection from being pursued. Madam Secretary, can you discuss what the impact on the preparation for the census would be if there were cuts?
Yeah. So although 2030 seems like a long time away, the Census Bureau right now has more than 50 research projects ongoing to improve the way we collect the data. I should say that, you know, everything about the census should be apolitical, data-based, fact-based, and we rely on the experts. And so they have, like I said, 50 research projects going on now. This is a very important year. We have called for investments in IT, research, design, to make sure that we get the most accurate information about how many Americans there are living, you know, how many people we have living in America and how they live their lives. And so yes, it would definitely, I think it's fair to say, we would be less accurate in 2030 if we weren't able to make the investments necessary to do that collection properly.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Raimondo, thank you for being here today
Thank you.
and to discuss the Department of Commerce's fiscal year 2024 budget request. From your request summary, I see that the department is asking for $12.3 billion this fiscal year, a 11% increase over FY23 enacted. That's a fair bit of money. Do you believe the Department of Commerce should receive or spend unauthorized funds?
I mean, I would leave it to Congress to decide what to authorize and appropriate. What I can tell you is we are using and spending and investing the appropriated money in accordance with Congress's intent.
Okay, what is your department's current spending authorization?
I'll have to get you the number. I'll get back to you.
Okay, so you don't know?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, so you came today to request $12.3 billion from the American taxpayers, yet you don't know if and how much you're legally authorized to have.
I'm sure my team could tell me in a second.
Okay. Well, according to the Congressional Budget Office and this committee's fiscal year 2023 report, many of the department's bureaus and programs are currently not authorized, some for more than decades. Let me give you an example. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration has not been completely authorized since 1992. The National Weather Service since 1993. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration, 1993. The Bureau of Industry and Security, 94. The Economic Development Administration, 2008. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology since 2013. So you've been the secretary for 2 years. Were you aware of these expired authorizations prior to submitting the 2024 budget request?
As I said, this is I respect Congress's authority. It's up to Congress to decide what to authorize, what to appropriate, and how to make those decisions. My job, and I am faithfully undertaking that, is to administer appropriated monies consistent with the law, with transparency and accountability to taxpayers.
Okay, well, you know, in Congress, we have authorizing committees and we have appropriating. We have one appropriating committee, this one, and we have 18 or 19 authorizing committees. And every department of the federal government has an authorizing committee that authorizes its use, or that authorizes whether it exists, that legally authorizes it, okay? And I'm puzzled as to why the Department of Commerce has not requested authorization from the authorizing committees.
As I said, we could take that up with the authorizing committees.
That would be great. That would be the Energy and Commerce Committee and potentially the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, I guess. Your department is broken down through both authorizing.
That's what happens when you cover everything from fish to space.
I get it. All right. So do you think it's not your responsibility to go get an authorization from Congress?
It's never my responsibility to tell Congress what to do. My responsibility is to carry out my job in the confines of Congress's intent, which is what we're doing.
Okay, well, you know, I know that I'm new to the Appropriations Committee, but I've been learning the processes of it, and I just want to ensure that there's proper oversight and accountability are afforded to the federal responsibilities and to tax dollar expenditures. I know past appropriators may not have strictly adhered to this process, but this majority came in on a commitment to regular order. And regular order means that you have an authorization and then you appropriate to that authorization. If you do not have an authorization, how can you appropriate to something that doesn't exist?
Once again, that to me is in Congress's jurisdiction, and so I'll leave it to you and your colleagues to sort through those issues.
Well, I hope that you will take this then and go to the appropriate authorizing committees and request the appropriate authorizations, because it's going to be difficult to support an appropriation without an authorization.
Thank you.
And thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Ruppersberger?
Okay, Secretary, first thing, thank you for being here. From where I sit, I think you've done a good job. You have a lot of different issues you have to deal with. we've been very supportive of building our semiconductor computer chips. And I'm concerned that we have not, we don't have the workforce to go where we need to go. In a CNN article, you said that we simply will not be successful in achieving the national security goals of the CHIPS initiatives unless we invest in our workforce, period. And full stop, you said for decades, we've taken our eye off the ball with manufacturing, which means that worker supply of people with the skills to do super technical manufacturing has withered. And so we need to be honest about it, but also embrace it as an opportunity to come up with creative solutions. To that end, the Commerce Department is asking every company vying for a share of $39 billion in direct funding for semiconductor manufacturing to develop and outline plans for how they plan to build a skilled and diverse workforce, including by working with high schools and community colleges. Can you tell us more on where we need to build the workforce, both on the government side and the commercial side?
Yes, thank you.
Real quickly, too, because I have a space question I want to ask.
Okay. Well, I'll say this. Right before coming here, I was at a semiconductor event with Senator Young talking about this topic. It was hosted by Purdue. The industry estimates that there'll be 100,000 semiconductor technicians short in the next few years, and those are non-college degree jobs if we don't train more. They also estimate that they're very short of PhD engineers and chemists. So my point in making those comments is that it's not enough to build the buildings. You need to have people who have the skills to do the job, and right now, given our very low unemployment rate, that is a challenge. So we have to think creatively. By the way, it's also true for building facilities. The unemployment rate in the building trades is, in some states, 0, full employment. Every one of these facilities will take between 5,000 and 10,000 building trades to build for years. So my point is that we have to get, and those are non-college degree jobs, working with high schools and apprenticeship programs, figuring out ways to tap communities that haven't previously been in the business of the building trade. So long story short, I have a sense of urgency about training people because it's necessary to meet the mission.
Okay. I'm going to switch to space real quick. I'd like to ask you about the growing problem of orbital debris and how it relates to the efforts of the Office of Space Commerce. The Russians last year tested an anti-satellite missile. They created a debris field that was so big it threatened the safety operations of our International Space Station. These are thousands of active satellites. There are tens of thousands of space debris ranging from nuts and bolts to old rocket stages, and all of them can cause damage. The Office of Space Commerce is charged with protecting the space-based services that are critical to our nation's infrastructure, sustaining U.S. space sector leadership globally and international space cooperation. What are your quick thoughts on the growing problem of orbital debris as well as the growing congestion due to a large constellation? And please talk about China as well.
Yeah. So my quick thoughts are that it is a problem, and it is a growing problem. I mean, the good news is that there's more commercial opportunities in space, right? We're innovating more, and so there are more satellites. The problem is, as you say, it's congested. There's much more opportunity for collisions, much more opportunity for malintent, stealing information and such. So what we are doing, a few things quickly. One is we're asking for increased funding, which we got last year. We're asking for more this year to have our space tracking system. I think of it as air traffic control for space, which is to say we need to know what's going on, what's available to cut down on the collisions. And so we're investing in that. We've increased the staff by 75% at Space Commerce. We've put a new director in, Rich Dalbello, who's excellent. We've elevated Space Commerce from lower in NOAA to higher up and giving it more attention. I'd be happy to have Deputy Secretary Graves come and sit with you because he's focused on this. The bottom line is it's a problem. It's going to get worse as you see more commercial space activities. China and Russia are both a problem, And so we need a much better system, which we're building, which we think will be operational by the end of fiscal year '24, to have a better sense of what's happening in orbit.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Adderholt?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask about the steel and aluminum 232 tariff. I understand we face October 2023 deadline to conclude negotiations on the global arrangement on sustainable steel and aluminum. And I also understand that both sides have now exchanged initial concept papers. But it appears that there's fundamental differences between the proposal that's been put forward by the Biden administration and also the response from the European Commission. Given the differences that are apparent at this point, what is your assessment of the prospects for concluding an agreement before the date of October 23rd, 2023, to possibly get some kind of negotiation finalized?
Yeah, a couple things. Ambassador Tai and the USTR are the lead in this negotiation, but I am aware of it. In fact, I was just meeting with the trade minister from the EU. We'll be headed over to Sweden in June to continue to make progress on this. I would say, we're hopeful to hit the deadline and we're making progress. We still have many months to go. But as a long-term solution, I think it's the right solution. So Ambassador Tai is closer to it than I am, but it's a priority. And the Europeans are working with us constructively to try to have it resolved.
What are your options if for some reason an agreement's not reached by that date?
I think we have to we need to operate as though we will, and so I'm gonna. The administration's going to work. I hate to say, there's always an option to continue going after October, but I think everyone is focused on having that happen. It sets the right incentive structure to have more green steel and aluminum, and the problem in steel and aluminum is China has been flooding the market with excess capacity and cheap, dirty steel and aluminum, and so this is the best tool, we think, to prevent that. And so I think our goal is to have it done.
Do you anticipate that the Section 232 tariff could be reimposed on imports from EU member countries?
That we don't, I'm not going to go there because I'm going to choose to focus on hitting the deadline and getting it done.
Sure.
I was in the middle of the negotiation to adjust the tariffs, and I don't think we want to go back to that.
Let me switch over to situation with weather situation. So far in 2023, we've seen a real alarming amount of deadly destructive tornadoes rip through the South, and especially my home state of Alabama. My rural constituents are especially vulnerable to tornadoes because we have a radar gap in West Alabama. The severe storms that produce deadly tornadoes are typically low-altitude systems that evade the legacy radar system, and that creates the gap in the coverage. My colleague from Alabama, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who is my neighbor to the south, we had a very productive conversation earlier this month with the National Weather Service Director Ken Graham about this very issue, and we discussed some of the issues that we're facing. He committed to us in that conversation to work with us to find a solution for West Alabama until the next generation radars are installed throughout the country. And of course, obviously, the next generation radars will be a while before that will take place. But until that takes place, there is a gap. And our constituents in Alabama are in that gap. And I guess my question to you, would you commit to working with the Director Graham, to find and rapidly implement a solution to resolve this radar gap that potentially could cause many more deaths in the state of Alabama.
Absolutely. I did not know. I was unaware of that gap.
Yep.
And I do know how devastating the tornadoes have been. In fact, I recently was on the phone with an employee of the Commerce Department in that part of the world whose house was destroyed by the tornado. So I took a note. I will look in on
Well,
it. and we'll work with you.
the situation with the gap is it's like EF 3 and 4 can be detected, but 1 and 2s cannot be detected. But as you know, 1 and 2 tornadoes, EF 1 and 2, it can be very deadly as well.
I see.
So that's where the gap is.
Yeah. Okay, yes, we'll work with you.
Congresswoman Sewell and I have been together trying to work on this, so we appreciate your commitment to that. Thank you. Now
Yes.
you're back.
Yes.
Mr. Morrell?
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Cartwright for holding this important hearing. And thank you, Madam Secretary, for not only your service, but your leadership of the department and the important work you have, and certainly for joining us here today. Last year, I was one of the voices calling for significant investment in the regional innovation in the CHIPS and Science Act, which is something I know that you've been very, very supportive of and worked hard on. And the final bill, as you obviously know, created the regional technology and innovation hubs that designate and fund up to 20 tech hubs of innovation in underinvested in communities and regions poised to make a leap forward in the innovation economy. Excuse me. Upstate New York, and I've shared this with you before, is an excellent example of a region poised to make such a leap forward. My district, which is Rochester, New York, alone is home to 2 top-tier research universities. Was also identified by MIT economists Simon Johnson and Jonathan Gruber in Jumpstarting America as the top technology hub candidate in the United States. So I'm certain the Commerce Department and Congress continue to prioritize tech hubs. We can unleash the potential of regions across the United States and accelerate the development of dozens of leading-edge technologies, particularly in underserved regions. I think you mentioned the big hubs that tend to attract a lot of the venture capital money. So what role would you say that the department expect the tech hubs to play in collaboration with other pieces in the CHIPS and Science Act investments? And will the department continue to prioritize the tech hubs among your other CHIPS responsibilities?
Yes, thank you. So it is a priority, and we will continue to prioritize it. It all relates to national security insofar as we need to tap into the technology, know-how, and research and development that we have in this country everywhere that it exists. I mean, in your world, Rochester Institute of Technology, other universities, upstate New York is filled with great universities, advanced technology, and, you know, as I said before, these great technologies don't exist just at MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. So we have to, the way we plan to roll this out, and we'll be rolling it out shortly, coming months, is it'll be a competitive process. We're going to ask each community to put forward, you know, a full, you know, a robust application, getting the whole community, you know, public sector, private sector, universities, and we think, you know, we'll designate 20 or more tech hubs. We'll fund, I don't know, plus or minus a dozen, 10, 11. But I hope that's just the beginning, because I know there are places that we should invest in all over this country to tap into the full potential.
Yeah, and you know this better than most, having come out of that world. I think something like 90% of the venture
Yeah.
capital dollars are in about
Yes.
5 regional
Yes.
communities. So that certainly excludes many communities. I know that the Science and Tech, or the CHIPS and Science Act, put the tech hubs at authorization of $10 billion in the bill. Only $500 million was authorized for appropriation last year, and I wonder if you could just address what if they're not funded to a much more appropriate level, the
Yeah.
missed opportunity there.
It's a huge missed opportunity. I mean, with $500 million, I mean, you can do the math yourself. I mean, if we were to pick 10, that's only $50 million each. It's actually less than that, because we'll need to put some money out for planning grants and such. there's surely more than 5 or 10 places around America that have cutting-edge research. As I said, I just came from an event hosted by Indiana. Amazing what they have going on in the heartland with Purdue and their institutions, and I could say that and could go around the table here. So we need more than 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 places, and frankly, they need more money to really build this out. If you look at places like, say, Pittsburgh, they are now leading edge in robotics, but it's taken time and a good deal of money and public-private partnerships. That's the final thing I'll say. This can't be done with government alone or government money. Our money has to be a small piece of the pie that catalyzes other money, private sector, coming together, and that's how we're going to judge who gets the money, the strength of the coalition that's coming together.
Well, thank you again for your leadership. I look forward to continuing to work with you, and thanks so much, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Elsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Do you prefer Madam Secretary or Governor?
Oh, Governor.
You do? Okay. I don't blame you. All right, Governor. Well,
Appreciate you asking that.
thank you for being here. I know that as a father of young children, that doing this job and being a parent and father is difficult, and so I appreciate the time that you've dedicated in service to your nation and to your state.
Same to you. I appreciate you saying
Thank you very
that.
much. And we have rugby in common. I don't think you were frontline, but I'm sure
No.
you were an outstanding back.
I was a scrum half.
Okay, I'm sure you're very good at it.
Not really, but.
Listen, I just wanted to talk about something that's really important to the voters of District 6 in Texas, just south of Dallas, largely rural community. And let's talk about the census real quick. The Department of Commerce handles many different sub-agencies, including the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau was established in 1902 to count the entire U.S. population every 10 years, as mandated in the Constitution, for the apportionment of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, along with other services. And it was reported that the census undercounted several states' populations in a 2020 after a post-enumeration survey. I can get you that reference if you need it down the road. This included Arkansas, Florida, Illinois, Mississippi, Tennessee, and my home state of Texas. The Census Bureau also overcounted 8 states, including Delaware, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Rhode Island, and Utah. And so, as we talk about, and it's very important to my voters, they bring it up all the time. If the people of Texas are underrepresented in the House, in their number of apportionment of congressmen, and the people of another state are overrepresented, then the Census Bureau has threatened the very foundation of our republic in a way that ensures the people of Texas are not fully represented. The very foundation of our system requires an accurate count of the number of American citizens who are eligible to vote and are represented by their representatives in the House. So the impression for the folks in my district are that the last census count was used by somebody, say on the left, to ensure that Democrat-leaning states were overcounted and conservative-leaning states were undercounted. 5 of the 6 states that were undercounted were majority Republican. 7 of the 8 states that were overcounted were a majority Democrat. That doesn't really, I'm not a statistician, but that doesn't sound very good to me. So let's talk about the budget. The Census Bureau is requesting $1.6 billion in fiscal year 24, which includes an additional $164 million for the 2030 census. How do y'all plan on fixing the lessons learned from the 2020 census? Because representation in Congress ultimately determines the Electoral College, and it's winner take all. So the folks in my district would really like to, they don't really trust the census. So I'd like to hear how you're gonna fix that.
It's an excellent question, and I appreciate the question. Let me say a few things. So first of all, you're right, which is to say there's no place for politics or political views in how the census is administered. It should be do the count, right? Do the count. Who's living in Texas, who's living in wherever, accurately, et cetera. So I'll give you that commitment. I, of course, wasn't here for the last census, but there'll be zero political interference. We're getting ready now for 2030. The instruction to the team is do your work, be apolitical, count the data, and make sure everyone's counted. Look, I will say 2020 was really hard. I was the governor at the time. It was in the middle of a lot of challenges to collect in 2020. So we're learning from that experience and figuring out how we can make it better. And as I said before with Congressman Meng, Right now, we have like 50 research projects going on in the census to figure out how to be more accurate. So I guess I would just say I agree fully with the sentiment and be happy to follow up with you, more specifically. Rob Santos, who runs the census, is a top-flight statistician from Texas, and can have him follow up.
I'd sure appreciate that, because I think finding out, when you're a fighter pilot, as my friend Mike Garcia and I flew together, you brief, you do the mission, and then you debrief. And I think a serious debrief that would tell us exactly what lessons learned we have, and then going forward so that this doesn't happen again, because I don't care. 2016, the left thought that the election was stolen. In 2020, there's a lot of folks on my side that don't have any faith in the integrity of the election. So it is important. It's absolutely essential for the survival of our republic the way we want it to, that we do this right next time. So thank you very much for your time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Governor, it's great to see you, and
Thank you.
you've done a wonderful job. We really appreciate your long, long public service. So thank you very much. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, it's headquartered in my district, and it's one of the leading agencies. We were there together, driving scientific innovation and some of our most pressing problems. However, the facilities are a train wreck. The buildings were built in the 1950s. The scientists, while they're great on science, they aren't good on asking for money. They aren't good on explaining why their buildings are falling down, and that it impedes their scientific work and costs us untold tens of millions of dollars by working in poor facilities. So China, of course, has taken the opposite task. They've invested in their equivalents of NIST. They actually have 5 facilities that were a dead ringer copy of NIST that they did when they came over here and looked at our NIST. Then they went out and built 5 of their own. So they're looking to overtake us in this area in standards and meteorology. So last year, with Chairman Cartwright's support, we were able to increase the construction funding in NIST to $130 million. This year, the president's budget came back at $262 million. And we're $2.3 billion backlog, don't forget, $2.3 billion behind. So I just want to stress the fact it's so important that with all the noise of cutting the budget to 22 levels, we can't shoot our nose off, spite ourselves, and we need to invest for the long term. As a business guy, that's the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And so could you just talk for a second about that hidden cost of these deteriorating facilities, especially the cost of talent? I mean, when the director told me she loses top talent to China, go to China to work, because they don't want to work somewhere nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your consistent support. I would invite anyone here to come with me for a visit to NIST facilities. The Congressman and I have gone, and it is true that these facilities need investment. I will tell you, the people working in NIST are top-notch. We have Nobel Prize-winning physicists who work for NIST. We have this leading artificial intelligence, quantum, and cyber experts work at NIST, but as you say, they work in dilapidated buildings, which is unfair, sometimes unsafe, and prevents them. The National Academy's assessment of the condition of NIST R&D facilities finds them to be, quote-unquote, unacceptable. Their report found that a median of 20% of all researcher time each year is lost due to facility impacts of their work. So they're less productive. They're less productive. I think it's probably at least 20%, having been there myself. And, where they go to the private sector, they go to universities, but we just have to make these investments, which is why we're asking for more investing.
Yeah, and we certainly have phenomenal talent there. It just absolutely blows your mind how smart these guys and gals, women are, men and women. But the young researchers, they have choices. And
Yeah.
they can go private or they can go abroad.
Yeah.
And that's where we seem to be losing that pipeline as our researchers just age out. And we don't have the young folks with the new ideas, coming up, because work facilities and standards matter to them more.
Agree. To attract new people. And again, back to everything we've been talking about, leading the world in technology, what they focus on is artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, quantum computing, everything America needs to lead in. And they are doing that, but the facilities in which they're doing that are holding them back and making them less productive.
Fantastic. I appreciate your support, and I look forward to the next round. We're going to talk about some broadband stuff. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I would like to do a second round of questions, but the secretary has an obligation at 4 o'clock.
So we can go
So
quick.
We
Do you wanna
want
do
to accommodate her
11 minutes?
schedule. So we'll do a second round, but very brief. Hopefully 3 minutes or less. And I'll recognize myself. The Assistance to Coal Communities program, administered by ADA, has been critical in providing funding and technical assistance to communities affected by the decline of the coal industry. I represent one of the biggest former coal mining communities in the country. And I understand the importance of this program for our communities, and I encourage you to prioritize grant funding for that program especially. Can you give us an update on the program's progress in supporting economic development and diversification efforts in coal communities across the country?
Yes. This is a top priority of mine, of President Biden's, and I know matters a lot to you in Kentucky. The update is that we are investing at record amounts and will continue to do so, and we are creating jobs in these communities in new industries, which is really very exciting. So for example, in Kentucky, we've put more than $23 million through EDA into coal communities since I've been secretary, effectively to create new jobs, to do job training. Same in West Virginia. With the ARP money, we were able to take $300 million and put it into coal communities. And I would simply say, as I've said before, these communities won't be brought back to life unless we invest. And you know what happens otherwise. No jobs, opioid addiction. It's just, we have to be there for them to get new jobs, new job training, new industries. And so we're extremely focused on it.
We're trying to reinvent the economy of my region with especially high-tech stuff. In fact, I've coined a phrase that fits our goal, and it's called Silicon Holler. So thank you for working with us. Do you agree with FBI Director Wray's national security concerns about TikTok? And do you agree with ODNI Director Haynes' assessment that China is collecting foreign data to target audiences for information campaigns?
I do. I don't think we can limit. I think that all of these connected apps and many other technology apps pose risks. And in fact, I look forward to working with Congress in a bipartisan way to enhance our security in that respect.
Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, last year's hearing, we talked about Ukraine and how the Bureau of Industry and Security is a critical agency in aiding our efforts to enforce the export controls on Russia and Belarus in response to Russia's war against Ukraine. We provided $22 million in supplemental funding to assist BIS on that front last year. Can you give us an update on how these funds have been used and is it working?
Thank you. Thank you for the support. I would say, yes, it is working. We have 39, we led a coalition of 39 countries around the world. We've put more than 500 Russian entities on the entity list. We've stopped hundreds of shipments going into Russia. we know they're struggling to continue the war because they can't repair equipment. They don't have the semiconductors to repair the equipment. They don't have the spare parts to conduct the equipment. You know, but it is, as I said before with Rep. Garcia, it's a daily vigilance. You know, it makes my blood boil every time I learn about, you know, a downed piece of equipment that has American equipment still in it. So we're constantly on it. Is it working? Yes. Do we need to stay on it every day? Yes. Can we do that work without resources? No.
Well, you have been diligent in coming to our classified security briefings, and I encourage you to keep doing that. Keep us posted. Yield back,
course.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief, Governor. VX, you remember VX, a very lethal chemical weapon gas, about 1,000 times more potent than sarin. If we had indications that VX gas or powder was en route, and we had indications from the Intelligence Committee or community, DOD, maritime surveillance, that there was a plan to ship that VX through Mexico, across our southern border and into the United States to be used as a chemical weapon, what would the response of Department of Commerce be?
I mean, I don't know the details of that, so I'm quite hesitant to talk about a specific issue. But look, anything like that would be an interagency response.
Sure.
You know, led by the intelligence community and Department of Homeland Security. But we would do whatever we needed to do to support
Contribute
the
to
effort.
making sure we're tracking the vessels, the points of origin of the material coming from China through to Mexico and assist the DOD, Homeland Security, in the interdiction of what would be effectively a weapon of mass destruction.
We would do whatever was called upon us to meet the mission.
I think we have that scenario today. It's just not called VX, it's called fentanyl.
Yeah.
We have active precursor exports coming out of China with this known game plan of sending them to Mexico,
Yeah.
taking that powder, making the pill in Mexico, and then shipping to the United States, where ironically and painfully, we've actually lost more people from
Yeah.
fentanyl than VX gas in the history of the planet, than just in the last couple days.
Yeah.
So I think this is the paradigm that Commerce, DOD, Homeland, and the intelligence communities need to take,
Yeah.
okay? I don't know how to spread that in this administration and get everyone to absorb that paradigm, but
Yeah.
that's not happening right now. We have a
Well-
weapon of mass destruction coming across our southern borders, killing 100,000 Americans every year, 30 times more than the people died on 9/11.
Yeah.
And this executive branch, to include Commerce, DOD, and state, are doing nothing to mitigate that, except for, you know, enforcement once it gets across our borders.
Yeah. Look, I would say a couple quick things. I'm mindful of time. This I did see up front and very painfully and personally as governor. And fentanyl, sometimes even touching it can be deadly.
That's right.
It-
Just
and
like
it's-
VX.
It is horrific.
That's right.
Much begins in China and is synthetic. The thing I would say to you is, look, this is a priority of the president's. I was with the president in Mexico. We talked extensively with President Lopez Obrador. I met just a week ago with Secretary Blinken on this. I'm going to be doing a lot more private sector in the U.S. outreach. So I disagree that we're doing nothing, but I will tell you it's a priority.
What we
and
are
can
doing
do
is
more.
ineffective. This has to be treated like a chemical weapon of mass destruction coming across the Pacific Ocean and through our borders. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Ms. Ming?
Thank you. Before I ask my quick question, I do want to give credit where credit is due in relation to my colleague's question about the census. Being from the state of New York, I want to applaud my leaders at the city and the state levels, one, for investing money and time in making sure that we were counting accurately in the state of New York, having a Get Out the Count campaign, and two, not engaging in fear-mongering and trying to determine who deserves to be counted or not. Madam Secretary, my question is about the department's regulation of 3D printed firearms. When the Trump administration moved jurisdiction of export oversight from state to commerce, they created an enforcement loophole which has allowed for the dissemination of instructions for printing 3D guns. Last October, I led a letter with Senator Markey asking President Biden to strengthen the regulatory oversight of these guns, specifically by having your department strike the ready for insertion qualification and clarifying that the rule included instruction files that were emailed or otherwise made available to foreign persons. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to insert my letter in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, do you believe the current version of the regulations are broad enough to apply to any known versions of currently viable 3D firearm files? And can we get a commitment from you to issue guidance to that effect?
Yeah. So let me say, you've been consistent in your focus on this, and I admire that. You can get a commitment that I will send Undersecretary Estevez to sit with you and talk through it. I will just say that we still work with the Department of State, right? This is all an interagency process, and state is at the table, and we absolutely share your, passion for making sure that none of this controlled substances, software, et cetera, can get into the wrong hands. So we'll follow up.
Thank you. I yield back with time to spare.
Mr. Clyde.
Okay.
I'd like to follow up on Rep. Elsie's questions regarding the census. Who gets counted?
Who gets counted? Everyone who lives in the country gets counted.
Everyone who lives in the country. Okay. So does that include illegals and permanent residents?
If you live here, yes. There's no citizenship requirement, nor should there be.
Okay, so in the last 2 years, over 6 million illegals have entered our country. Illegals cannot vote. Only citizens can vote. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, the more illegals that enter the country, that then disproportionately disenfranchises those of us who are citizens who can vote because we don't have proper representation. Is that not right?
I would dispute that characterization, but my job is to run the census faithfully in accordance with the law and the Constitution, to count everyone who lives here, and that is what we are doing faithfully.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess we'll just have to disagree on that where it comes to citizens versus illegals, because I think that that disproportionately, for any particular area, it disproportionately disenfranchises the American citizen, because then it takes fewer citizens to create one particular representative, and more illegals then can do that. I mean, if you look at the 6 million illegals, that's the equivalent of what, 12 congressional seats? No, not 12, 9 congressional seats. That's a lot of people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Trone, can you keep it to 1 minute?
I can do it, Mr. Chairman. Hey, thank you, Governor. Great time. Quickly, in all the census counting problem, that was Trump working really hard to disenfranchise and not count the minorities. Just so we're all clear about the honest truth of that. Broadband, going to be a game changer. Rural America, going to be a whole nother world. It's so awesome it's going to happen. $42.5 billion coming out of your group. April Delaney's pushing it out. We're working with her. She's great. Are we on track for June on the funding?
June 30th. Every state will know by June 30th what their amount is.
Okay, great. And workforce development programs, we're going to need a ton of workforce. Same problems you have in the CHIPS area. Putting this broadband in, we don't have the people to put it in. Thoughts on that? What do we need?
Listen, this is a huge issue, okay? The unemployment rate among plumbers, pipe fitters, welders in your states, you can't find anyone.
0.
Broadband alone, we think, will require about 100,000 people, technicians, fiber splicers, people to lay the fiber and the whole thing. Chips, another 100,000. So we need to train, and the great thing is, high-paying jobs that don't require a college degree. So we are baking in workforce development into everything we do at Commerce. Everything, and in fact, part of our request in EDA is $100 million for good jobs, CHIPS money, broadband money, train people and get them jobs.
Only way we're going to get it right. Thank
Yes.
you. I yield back.
Well, Madam Secretary, it's 2 minutes after 4. You've been saved by the bell.
Well, I don't know. Representative Trone says this was a good time.
That concludes today's hearing. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Spending so
time.
much time with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Without objection, all members will have 7 legislative